Brandon Gomez, tell us more about cannabis stocks today.
Hey, Scott. Yeah, look, it was a massive surge in cannabis names. We've been here before, though. Trump once again voicing his support to reclassify cannabis as a less dangerous drug. Now, this would align it with steroids or Tylenol with codeine, rather than more dangerous drugs like heroin and LSD. Now, it could blaze a new trail for the industry, but investors shouldn't light up with celebration just yet. Despite Trump saying today that a decision could come in the next few weeks, experts say reclassification isn't a quick hit. It takes the Attorney General, the DEA, many layers. I spoke with the Tilray CEO, Irwin Simon, earlier. He said he'd expect the process to take a year, adding his confidence so that Trump gets things done. Now, if it happens, it could open the door to billions in new investment and tax benefits. But while renewed support is a breath of fresh air for the industry, there are still some high hurdles to overcome, Scott.
Boy. So we got to talk about a pretty interesting announcement that was made by President Trump when it comes to reclassifying marijuana from a Schedule 1 drug, which would put it on par with heroin, okay, to Schedule 3, okay? And this has made some waves. You have the liberal media here, Daily Beast. They claim that MAGA is freaking out over Trump's plot to reclassify marijuana. Now, you know, I don't think anybody in MAGA is really freaking out about this, right? I think that this topic, for the most part, when you look at the overall electorate, basically we're at a consensus in regards to how society feels about decriminalization and legalization of marijuana. But in conservative circles and libertarian circles, yeah, there is much less of a consensus in regards to this topic. And again, that's the most fascinating part about this that I want to talk about, because I think Trump doing this will clearly have some political ramifications, okay? But also at the same time, just the arguments, okay, in and of themselves, again, within conservative and libertarian spaces, I think are fascinating. Like, for example, Matt Walsh says, quote, "No country of potheads has ever thrived or ever achieved anything at all. Every city that legalized it became an even bigger shithole basically overnight." You also have Jack Posobiec. He says, "America deserves better. Our kids deserve better. I don't want to have to be smelling weed anytime I take my kids anywhere in a city or a national park." So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll this clip of President Trump making this announcement that they could reschedule marijuana.
There's reporting that the administration is going to reclassify marijuana. Would that send mixed messages that if marijuana is okay, some drugs are okay, but we're trying to clean up crime? How do they go hand in hand?
We're only looking at that. That's early, but you know, somebody reported it, which is fine. We're looking at it. Some people like it, some people hate it. Some people hate the whole concept of marijuana because if it does bad for the children, it does bad for people that are older than children. But we're looking at reclassification, and we'll make a determination over the next few weeks. And that determination hopefully will be the right one. It's a very complicated subject, the subject of marijuana. I've heard great things having to do with medical, and I've had bad things having to do with just about everything else. But medical and, for pain and various things, I've heard some pretty good things. But for other things, I've heard some pretty bad things. The other part of your question, I mean, we're just going to see what happens with it all. We're going to have a tremendous success in what we're doing. Other cities are hopefully watching this. They're all watching, just like everyone's watching here.
Safe roads. We just had that report from Jane King at the stock exchange saying cannabis industry booming yesterday with this news, right? Yeah. Lighting up, getting all excited about that. All right, but let's talk about this. Not making it legal when it comes to recreational use, but could this move of reclassifying it to Schedule 3 be perceived as like a safety endorsement and it leads to higher rates of use?
It could. I mean, but this reclassification is not guaranteed to be just to 3. It can go to 2, it can go to 3, or it can be removed completely from the controlled substances list at all. And so there are a number of ways that this could happen. Being a Schedule 1 puts it on the same level as heroin. Now, I'm not a drug user, but I'm pretty sure marijuana and heroin shouldn't be in the same classification. I don't think you need to be a scientist to recognize that they have different drastic secondary effects, different drastic impacts. And so while you have 38 plus states that have legalized marijuana use in a number of capacities, either medical or recreational, what you don't have is the federal government stepping out of the way. And our last hit, I've talked about how the party of smaller federal government has done that in a number of regards, with abortion, with all type of other type of care. this would fall in line with their normal thinking. Let's remove the federal government's regulation. Let's remove the federal government's hands and allow the states to make determinations. And that right now is the only thing that's blocking individual contributors to this marijuana process, and bigger companies that are trading on Wall Street. They don't have the access to the tax benefits that you would get because the federal government is blocking them from being able to utilize those.
Yeah, so you see now, you heard that. Now, considering how, practically speaking, marijuana, at least in, I believe, a vast majority of states, even the states where weed is like technically illegal, for the most part, like there's some loopholes that have allowed certain businesses to operate selling derivatives that, in my opinion, effectively is decriminalization. So practically speaking, the biggest impact of this is going to be in the business of marijuana, okay, in regards to allowing these marijuana companies to have access to the traditional finance system. Because right now, due to the fact that marijuana is Schedule 1, okay, you have a lot of banks, a lot of traditional financial institutions that are saying, nah, we're good, right? We don't want to deal with this industry. There are a lot of investors that don't want to get involved just due to the fact that it is a Schedule 1 drug at the federal level, which, again, the federal government basically says has no accepted medical use, high potential for abuse, and that's why it's in the same category as heroin and LSD. Now, just for reference here, Schedule 2 drugs include cocaine, methamphetamine, and oxycodone, which have accepted medical use with restrictions and high abuse potential, severe dependence risk. Okay, so basically the government could choose, Trump could choose to reclassify marijuana as Schedule 2, Schedule 3. They can remove it off the list. There's a lot of things that they can do, right? We don't really know exactly what they're going to do, but they're leaning towards doing it. Now, I want to break this down from the perspective of what I personally believe about this subject and also the political angle on it, right? Because there's also, again, a political aspect of this that needs to be discussed. So let's go ahead and get into it, because I am not one of these people that believes that marijuana is a miracle drug, right? I know that there's some research to suggest that marijuana does have medicinal properties, right? There's, legitimate medical uses for it. However, I think one of the things that annoy me the most about pro-legalization arguments is that they try to frame marijuana as a harmless drug, right? As if marijuana does not have any potential negative side effect. And that's just simply not the case, okay? There are studies, okay, and research to suggest that marijuana is potentially harmful to the brain, the lungs, the heart, especially when you look at adolescents, teenagers, and high usage of marijuana, the effects that it has on brain development. Yeah, marijuana is not a miracle drug, in my opinion. It is not harmless, okay? And I definitely think that it is one of those drugs that, at the very least, okay, if you're going to decriminalize it, then it should be legalized, taxed, and regulated, okay? Regulated heavily, just due to the fact that it is a drug and it does have harmful effects, okay? So with that being said, that's basically where I lean on this subject, right? In the sense that I am pro decriminalization. And one of the main reasons why is because I think that more research on marijuana is warranted, because like I just outlined, there are definitely negative health effects from marijuana. There also could be medical uses as well too. I think more research is needed to establish more certainty around that. And I think that is warranted, okay? And I think ultimately today, marijuana, probably 30, 40, 50 years from now, with the amount of studying, okay, more scientific research into it, it'll probably end up like tobacco, right? In the sense that I think people will accept that, this ain't the miracle drug that we thought, and it definitely has some harmful effects, but not so harmful that we're going to ban it, okay? I'm not arguing to ban tobacco, and tobacco is really harmful, okay? And I think that is probably where marijuana will ultimately kind of be in that category. Doesn't mean it's the exact same. I think it'll be thought of in a somewhat similar way. And I'm not entirely sure how you can make an argument for marijuana being illegal while alcohol is legal, right? That is also part of the reason why, I think that the argument between libertarians and conservatives on this subject are so interesting, because I honestly do not think that traditional conservatives who are against marijuana legalization or decriminalization have good arguments, right, at all, to be honest with you, because for every argument that you make about weed being harmful, you can make that same argument about alcohol and it being much worse with alcohol. When you talk about negative health effects long term, I think alcohol is much worse. And again, I'm acknowledging that I don't believe that weed is a miracle drug in the sense that I definitely think that it has harmful effects. I just don't know if there's any solid arguments to suggest that the harmful effects of weed are worse than alcohol. I think one of the arguments that traditional conservatives lean on the most in regards to supporting the idea that alcohol should be legal while marijuana should be illegal is social and cultural arguments, which I also think are bad arguments. And the reason why I say that is because for as much as you can criticize weed and the social effects of marijuana, like for example, lacking motivation, being okay with being bored, and just general overall laziness, I think that those negative social externalities pale in comparison to the negative social and cultural externalities of alcohol, right? It's one thing if you could make an argument that alcohol has had an overall positive impact socially and culturally in this country. I think that would be one argument, but I'm not entirely sure how anybody can make that argument, considering the fact that, generally speaking, when you talk about the ills of society, a lot of it does stem from alcohol usage, right? Everybody knows the difference between the pothead and the alcoholic. And I think many people would much rather deal with the pothead than the alcoholic. Okay, the alcoholic is angry, makes dangerous decisions, put people's lives in danger, gets into fights, is impulsive, makes bad decisions. Okay, again, just alcoholism, right, has destroyed families. It has destroyed lives. It has destroyed communities, right? I just don't see how you can logically make the argument that alcohol should be legal while marijuana should be illegal. Now, it's one thing, okay, if you're making an argument that alcohol should be illegal and marijuana should be illegal as well too. Okay, cool, right? I think that actually is a much stronger argument to stand on because, again, you're just making an argument that, hey, these drugs are negative externalities for society. Overall, we should not have a population that is using drugs at all, at least, for reasons outside of medical purposes. These intoxicants, again, are just not good overall. Therefore, all of it should be banned. Okay, cool, right? Now, will that actually work? Okay, that's another question, right? That's a whole other topic. But my point is that I just don't see how you can, in good faith, make a logical argument for why is it that alcohol should be legal and weed should be illegal, right? I mean, I've heard a lot of people talk about, kids, doing drugs or smoking weed. It's like, yeah, that's a problem. But they were smoking weed when weed was not legal in a lot of these states. And they were also drinking too. I think just generally speaking, when people talk about the negative effects of marijuana, I think a lot of it really just comes down to the individual, right? Like, for example, people say, well, weed makes people unmotivated. Yeah, I think that weed probably does make it okay or fun to be bored, right? Put it that way. I think that's the best way to describe it, right? Weed makes it entertaining to be bored. But if you're generally a motivated person, weed is not going to stop you from accomplishing your goals or crushing life, right? And, I'm saying this because I heard a lot of people say, well, I've never met a successful pothead. And I'm like, nah, there are a lot of successful potheads out here. You just don't know about it because they don't tell you about it, right? They don't advertise that they smoke weed, right? As they shouldn't, right? I mean, it's one of those things where they make a personal choice. But again, people say things like there are no successful potheads. I'm like, nah, that's definitely not true. That is 100% not true, okay? I'm telling you that right now. That's not true, okay? So again, a lot of the arguments, right, around or against weed when it comes to motivation and laziness and stuff like that, the social aspects of it, I just think are very, it just depends on the individual, right? I mean, if you are a lazy person, right, and you smoke weed, yeah, it's probably going to make you lazier, right? It's definitely not going to help at all, okay? But again, if you're one of these people that's going to crush life, right, if you are motivated and you're a go-getter, right, I don't think weed is really going to stop you, okay? So, it's one of those things where I'm just saying this based off my own life observations. I just don't see any good, logically consistent argument outside of the cultural argument that, well, alcohol has just been a part of American history, right? And that's why it should be legal and weed should not. I just don't think that outside of that, there's any real, argument for why is it that alcohol should be completely legal and weed should be illegal, when, again, I think there are very strong arguments from a health perspective and also, again, from a social and cultural perspective that maybe alcohol is worse, right? Regardless, I do think that there are some legitimate arguments about the negative externalities of marijuana when it comes to it being used in public, right? When you talk about the smell, when you talk about just kind of how it runs down a lot of places, right? A lot of these places that sell it, again, it just kind of seems like it runs down or it brings down certain areas of town, right? So I totally understand that, and that's why I think that it should be heavily regulated, right? In the sense that I do not think people should be allowed to smoke it in public places like parks and downtown areas and things like that. I think there should be heavy penalties, okay? And I'm talking about even possibly jail time for smoking it in these public places. There should be heavy regulations on where it's sold and where you can consume it, right? Now, again, if you want to consume it in your own home, it's hard for me to argue that you shouldn't be able to do that if you can drink alcohol, right? It's hard for me to argue because ultimately, hey, people have the right to intoxicate themselves and, to put bad things in their bodies, right? And I don't think that the government should get in the way of it in all cases. Now, again, in some cases, in a lot of cases, yeah, they should. But I think in the case of alcohol versus weed, I just don't see how you can make any real logically consistent argument for alcohol being legal and weed not being legal, right? So that's where I'm at when it comes to the whole topic of legalization and decriminalization. I think at the very least, it should be decriminalized and rescheduled, right? At the very least, that's what should happen, okay? And from a political perspective, this is a win for President Trump, right? It's a W, and it's a W for Republicans too, because President Trump seems to have a better understanding of the electorate, right, in politics than Republicans, because again, there are a lot of Republicans, traditional Republicans, that are against this, right? And I just don't think that they're gonna win the argument, right? They're not gonna win the argument in the court of public opinion on this topic, right? And it politically would be smart for Republicans. They don't necessarily have to get on board with it, but they probably shouldn't be in the way of stopping it, right? I think there's a difference. I don't think they should be coming out here and advocating for it, right? Again, pretending as if it's some miracle drug. I don't think that Republicans should be doing that at all. But in regards to being like, you know what, we're going to get out of the way and let states do states, which I personally believe that states should have the ability to regulate it, right? If a state says, hey, we want it to be illegal, fine. I think that states have the ability to do that, or they should have the ability to do that without the federal government getting in the way. So politically speaking, it's a W, right? And it's one of those things that if it happens before the midterms, again, it could be one of those things that could be a boost to Republicans, right? And that's why I think that it is not a coincidence that the timing on this is what it is, because it could take a year, it could take longer, but currently the process is moving, right? And if it's one of those things where it gets descheduled or just flat out legalized before the midterms, that could be a huge boost to Republicans, right? It could be a huge boost, okay? I don't think Republicans should get in the way, right? I think that for the most part, Republicans that are against this should probably just be like, nah, you know what? We're going to sit this one out, right? It's just some things where it's like, nah, we're not going to be on the 20 side of this 80-20 issue, because that's what it is at this point. It's an 80-20 issue, and Republicans would be smart just to be like, you know what? We're just going to, take a step back, right? Take a step back and just not fight this battle. There's just some battles that are not worth fighting. There's a lot of veterans that are using it. There are a lot of older people, okay, that are getting into it because, again, of the alleged medical and medicinal uses. It's just one of those things where even among the base, right, it is a divided issue. But with everybody else, I mean, is almost like a settled issue. So, when you look at it from a political perspective, it's basically a no-brainer at this point, right? And the reason why is because it's certainly going to be popular with independents, with libertarian types, which, again, apparently Trump is struggling with right now, okay? And this could be a good way to kind of get them back on board, right? And also some left-leaning individuals as well, too. I think that it will play well with them, and it's not going to cost them any votes when it comes to conservatives, because even Republicans and conservatives that are against it, they're not going to abandon Trump over this, right? I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people have kind of accepted that this is a thing, right? And this is where we're at, for the good or for bad. But, if you're going to make the argument that we should ban weed, then I'm not sure how you should make the argument that we should ban alcohol too. Now, if you want to get on board with just banning all of it, again, that's another conversation, right? That is a much more legitimate conversation, in my opinion, than having alcohol be legal while weed is not legal. I just think for most people who've dealt with potheads and who have dealt with alcoholics, I think we all kind of have an idea of what is the most dangerous drug between the two and how a lot of this really doesn't make sense, right? Again, if you talk about some of the arguments against legalization of marijuana, while at the same time alcohol is legal. Yeah, I think most people kind of understand that this is not logically consistent, right, in regards to the current state of legalization for both drugs. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.